Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Eden Road podcast, where on tonight's show we're going to be previewing Tottenham away on Wednesday night. Pleased to say, to walk us through that preview is Flav Bateman of the Fighting Cock podcast. Flav, thanks so much for taking time to join me, mate. I'm really looking forward to Wednesday night, and yeah, this should be good.
You are looking forward to it?
Yeah, I am.
Have you been to our ground before?
Yeah, I went last season, went the season before as well. I think we played you on a similar kind of night. I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday. We lost 2-0, but last season we actually had some joy. So I'm looking forward to it.
Hopefully things have changed since last season. I don't know how sort of closely linked in you was to what was happening at Tottenham last year, but it's a different feeling around Tottenham Hotspur this season. And while we're just coming off the back of a narrow loss to Manchester City, which can happen to anyone, we feel pretty good at home, and so it should be a stern test for Brentford and Frank, even if you do have Ivan Toney returning.
We'll get onto that, but just before we get going, guys, remember to keep dropping the comments down below. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels, and also give us a follow on our socials. It's at the Eden Road on Twitter and at Eden Road Pod on Instagram. Flav, I do want to start with Man City, like you just mentioned, and maybe then talk about some of the players that are missing through AFCON and Asian Cup. So you've got Son, Sarr and Basuma all away on international duty. In terms of that midfield, how have Bentancur, Højbjerg and Skip been kind of deputising in terms of those absentees?
I mean, you can see the difference in quality and also fundamentally the purpose of the player, right? So Basuma and Sarr, you would argue, are sort of they're perfect players for their relative positions, whereas we're having to kind of crowbar Skip and Højbjerg into 8s and 10s and 6s, and in Skip's performance against Manchester United, the one before Man City, he was playing as a 10 at times. These aren't roles that are typical of them, but you know, they've done okay. They've done as well as you'd expect, given the fact that we've been winning games without some of our best players in midfield. Against Manchester City, we had Højbjerg, Bentancur and Kulusevski in midfield. So Kulusevski has come across from the right, and he's been playing as a 10 and an 8 in the middle of the park in Maddison's absence, with Johnson on the right. So in those moments when you've needed Skip and Højbjerg to step up, you've got to say that they've played to the best of their ability. But it's clear when they're on the pitch that they're a level below what, you know, Basuma, Sarr, Maddison and Bentancur are. You know, Bentancur, since coming back from injury, has been asked to do a lot. He's been playing all over that three-man midfield, and he's probably still a couple of games away from being where we saw him be at the tail end of Conte's tenureship at Spurs, and that was one of the most underrated midfielders in the Premier League, in my opinion. So there's lots for Spurs to do, and lots for us to grow. Lots of space for us to grow into, and it's that midfield where you'll see the main bulk of that growing, I think, in the coming games.
I do want to touch on Bentancur a bit later on in the podcast, but now you've mentioned it, how important is he to Spurs, and how has his role changed under Ange? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but he hasn't actually played significant minutes pre-United away a couple of weeks ago.
He's played. He's come in off of a ACL injury. Before then, Postecoglou he didn't get any minutes under Postecoglou. He was still coming in. He was in his recovery, so that was like a new player for Postecoglou coming back in. He returned ahead of schedule, about 3 weeks to a month ahead of schedule, which was surprising. But apparently, if you believe, well, you should believe Postecoglou, we were struggling in that moment, and it was his return to Tottenham that saw the results pick up. But in his first game back, sorry, that's since he come back from his second injury. His first game back, he got an ankle injury from a Matty Cash challenge, and again he returned from that very quickly as well. A couple of weeks when we thought he would be out, or 3 weeks when we thought he'd be out for 6 weeks. So, he's a magnificent footballer, and so much better than the one we thought we were going to get. There was a lot of criticism of Tottenham's acquisition of both Kulusevski and Bentancur, and a lot of that came from the Italian press. Now, I don't know how much work you've done with the Italian football press, but outside of inside Italy, they have needle with each other about their respective football clubs. And all of the journalists I've spoken to seem to have an allegiance to a certain football club. But outside of that, their allegiance is to Italy and the national team and the reputation of Italian football. So the reaction to Spurs picking up these two players from they were periphery players when we signed them was relatively it was almost like, Juventus are pulling Tottenham's pants down. These guys are no good. There was one journalist in particular that still has this tweet up, but he talked about that, is it that the Bentancur loses the ball in key positions 3 or 4 times a match. So we just didn't really know what we were getting, and as it transpired, we got 2 excellent players. But in the formative periods of their time at Spurs, you probably thought Kulusevski was the better of the 2, but now I'm not quite sure. What has he been doing differently that he did under Conte? Not a lot, really. I mean, the styling system is different, so he has much more time on the ball and he can think forward football much more regularly than he did under Conte. But his influence on the team was the same. Like, even when things were going bad for Conte, we knew that Bentancur was going to have a 7 or 8 out of 10 every week. So his system, the system has changed around him, but he's just been typical of Rodri Bentancur. Really, he's performed at a level that he has since he arrived, and he's an absolute gem of a footballer, beautiful to watch.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think there's a couple more players that I do want to mention, but just more broadly before we get into some specifics, I'd imagine you're very happy with Spurs' first half of the season. In terms of the expectations when Ange came in, do you feel he's matched or exceeded those expectations at this stage of the campaign?
I think we're ahead of where we thought we would be, for sure. What I assumed at the start when he arrived was I didn't really care what happened this season. Care's the wrong word. What I wanted was a new brand of football, attacking brand of football, and to enjoy watching my team play again. That was like the bare minimum. That's what I wanted. And if he achieved that and we finished 8th or 9th, as we did last year, then that's progress in my eyes. And you saw at the start of the season that he achieved so much more than that. You were top after 10 games, and then that Chelsea game, I don't know if you watched it, but there's complete capitulation from Romero getting sent off for a terrible challenge, Doggy getting sent off, suspensions coming out of everywhere, and you're losing Van der Ven and Maddison for 3 months each. So it started to fall apart somewhat. But you could make excuses for Postecoglou, and you can make excuses for us not winning games that we should have won, like West Ham and Aston Villa at home, where we played better than those teams, but we just we were kind of fumbling around because we weren't quite sure what first 11 we were gonna see. But the performances remained, but the results disappeared somewhat. How I feel now is how I felt since I listened to him in his first interview, and that's just full of optimism. For the first time in many years, I can't wait to watch Spurs play. Like, we've just lost to Manchester City, but we've got you guys on Wednesday, and I'm really looking forward to it. So he talks and says the correct things, which is it's complete opposite to what Conte did. Having him as our spokesman and our manager and our figurehead was agonizing at times. He would talk. We'd lose a game, and you'd think, what's going to come out of his mouth? Not only did you feel terrible about just watching your team play, but you also were then in a situation where you're having your manager throw you under the bus as well. And some people might say, "Oh, well, it was correct. It's correct that he would criticize the players, like that game against Southampton, the 3-3 game, which essentially saw him lose his job." His interview after that, he said that he essentially said the players are selfish and they're playing for themselves, and that might be true, right? It might be true, but as a fan, that doesn't help you feel any better, and certainly doesn't make you think that you have a manager who's able to fix these things. So we're having to deal with not only losing games or drawing games where we should have won, but Conte saying, this is a massive problem that I don't know how to fix, and I'm going to set fire to everything because I don't know how to fix it. That's how I took it. To someone like Postecoglou saying, we're going to give every opportunity to play the best football, for these players to play the best football of their career, and if it goes wrong, it's on me. It's something I've failed in doing. And when your manager speaks like that, if it does go wrong, you accept it. You accept you're a part of a process, and there's this method and plan in place. And if that plan is something that we all buy into, that means win, lose, or draw, you're in on it. And it's the same way that the most sensible Arsenal fans out there are probably enjoying what's happening with Arteta and their football club at the moment, because they have a plan, they've backed him financially, and they've given him the patience that any manager needs in order to achieve. If we have a plan and fans have bought into it, to not everybody is as pragmatic in their thinking, I guess, but if you bought into something and you agree that we're moving in the right direction, then obviously losing games is a part of football, but you understand what's happening at the football club, and I think that's where we are at the moment.
And it's funny that you mentioned sort of the fact that the focus is now on the football, as opposed to when Conte leaves, it kind of happens at every club that he's at. He burns the bridges, castigates the players or whatever. But now Andrew's back, and I know that football is so important to Tottenham fans. Not that you don't care about trophies, but I think primarily you play nice football, and that's what gets the fans on side. Talk to me a bit about Ange the man. I absolutely love him. People who don't, or people who claim that they don't, I just think they must think that they're edgy, because he's just he's just a breath of fresh air. How much do you love him?
I don't know if you've seen Jonathan Liew I think he's in writes for the Guardian. He hates it.
Yeah.
He's got this, I don't know what it's about. He just absolutely hates his guts. I can only echo sort of what I've said, is in that you feel like he's pulling it in. He's driving the ship, right, and we're all just being pulled along in its current. And he says the right things. He behaves in the right way. He doesn't get involved in hyperbole. And his brand of football is some of the most exciting I've seen since early Pochettino times. And even when you're failing, you're doing so with an element of courage and a willingness to attack. And you saw, I take you back to that Chelsea game again, where in some instances he was criticised for what he did when we had 9 men, which was play a high line, and when we didn't have the ball, essentially have a line across the halfway, literally a single formation line at times when we didn't have the ball. So to play this offside trap, which would force Chelsea to play through us, and hopefully would catch them offside, and Vicario would clean up or make a challenge. And some people are saying, "No, it's naive. You can't play that way. You're in 9 men against Chelsea." And as it transpired, we lost 4-1. But it was the most satisfying loss that I've ever experienced in my life. If you remove the rivalry with Chelsea and just merely look at what you saw on that night, and that was players that have bought completely into Postecoglou's system, that believe in him, and a manager that is unrelenting in his quest to win football matches in the right way. The right way is inverted commas. Winning matches, but he has a way that he needs to win. And as a Spurs fan, you have to respect it. But the players had bought into it. And, we lost 4-1, but I would have been more worried if he would have completely abandoned his philosophies in that moment and just gone, right, low block, let's try and see this out. And we had 30 minutes for 25 minutes. They would have got us eventually. So is it better to lose, die on your feet rather than on your knees, kind of thing? And that's what we saw there. And that ultimately will, if we have a chance of winning with Postecoglou, we can't play any other way. It has to be that way. And if we lose doing it, then so be it. Because I cannot sit through a single minute of pragmatic football that we saw under Conte. No longer. Because and it wasn't just that, it was on the back of Mourinho as well. And their methods worked, and no doubt they'll have successes in their future. Maybe not what they've achieved previously, but Conte and Mourinho probably will have successes in the future in some degree. But it was never going to work at Spurs. And that brand of football you mentioned, that needs to be the starting point. And we haven't had any real success in the Premier League era, but the amount of room that you have to breathe is smaller and bigger depending on the brand of football you're playing. So Postecoglou will get infinitely more space to operate in than Conte would. And that comes from Daniel Levy and the scenario that he created at the club in doing what he thought was best in bringing win now managers in Postecoglou, Conte and Mourinho. You could understand the methodology and the idea about that. There isn't a Spurs fan out there I don't think, that wasn't pleased when Conte and Mourinho were made manager.
Hmm.
But because of the brand of football they played, it meant that you're abandoning what Tottenham is as what the fan base have grown up watching, which is attacking football and exciting football. So if you abandon it, you have to win. And when we didn't win, and not only that, did we start losing badly, it was only a matter of time. Whereas Postecoglou, I think this is a project that we've got to buy into for the next 4 years, if we're lucky enough to have him that long.
In terms of that project, I was reading an article from Jack Pitt-Brook the other day on The Athletic, basically saying about how now Jurgen Klopp's gone. Well, he's going to be leaving Liverpool at the end of the season. It could be a chance for Spurs in this new Postecoglou era to build a squad that could potentially challenge for the league in a year or two and have a real go at winning silverware. Are you? I mean, I was going to ask you, are you confident that Ange's the right man to do that? But I know that's the answer now. What would be, instead of that question, what would you say would be a successful sort of 2-year spell at Tottenham in the next couple of years?
I mean, no one has a right to win the league, right? But if you want to be set up in a position where you can challenge, and I don't think Spurs are that far off from that. I still think that we can challenge this year. The likelihood of us winning the league is very small, but being a part of that conversation and the narrative that leads in towards the tail end of the season, Tottenham, if things go correctly, could be in that conversation. Statistically, we have like a 2% chance of winning the league. So if you believe those tables that predict results, 2% isn't very much, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to be there and thereabouts. So yes, he's the right man to do it. I think we're in a good position. We're in an excellent position financially, and a lot. I don't know how much time we've got, but there's a lot of that has come from Daniel Levy's running of the football club. There are a lot of clubs scrambling around now trying to sell players because they realise that the profit and sustainability laws and rules in the Premier League actually mean something, because Everton and now Forest are going to be punished quite harshly because of their failings. So that means clubs are realising that they cannot break these rules, because they're writing off a season pretty much of whatever their aspirations are. If they break these rules, they're writing off those aspirations for that season. They might still achieve with the relative points total, but Aston Villa, for example, who potentially need to sell players before June. Newcastle are in a situation where they have to sell before they buy. Arsenal can't spend, or haven't been able to spend in January, because they've reportedly only have 11 million euros to spend before they breach rules. So it does now mean something. Now, what Daniel Levy's done is created a football club that generates insane amounts of money, which should give us an opportunity to spend and reinforce in the squad, which will give Postecoglou the players he needs to launch a title challenge. And unfortunately, that is what will dictate football, and has dictated football for many, many years, in that how much money do you have to spend directly equates to how well you do in the league, in terms of wages as well. So Spurs are in a position to now do that, to spend accordingly. So let's hope they do it, and there is no doubt that Postecoglou is the man for sure.
Mm-hmm. I saw that Spurs were quite high up on the Deloitte top earning football teams of 2023, so that's testament to that, I guess. I do want to talk about Brennan Johnson. Just to move on to some specifics for the actual game on Wednesday.
Yeah,
I saw a few Spurs fans on Twitter getting on his back over the last few games. Bit of a Brentford link there too, because of our ultimately unsuccessful admiration of him in the last transfer window.
Yeah,
I think he's a really good player with really good attributes. I don't think Brentford would have been interested in him if he wasn't. But would it be fair to say it hasn't been a complete success for him so far at Spurs?
Yeah, that's fair to say. There's a reason why Brentford and Spurs are getting linked with similar players, because I think our methods in recruitment are we have certainly learned from Brentford and Brighton in that how they find players and profile them and decide whether or not they're going to come to, or we're going to approach to buy them. The same thing as Noosa as well. I want to get your thoughts on him, actually, if you don't mind, because it looks like he's chosen Brentford over Spurs, which is
never thought I'd see the day.
well, let's talk. We'll talk about it. But to answer your question, Brennan Johnson hasn't had a great start. There's been 4 or 5 performances where he's been excellent, and really had a good game. But it does feel like there's development to do. And what we paid a lot of money for him for a player that isn't quite ready for the level that Spurs aim to be this season. That's not to say he shouldn't make up a major part of our first team and shouldn't be not a major part of the squad for going forward. But I think he's played a lot more football than and in huge games than we thought he would have to, and that's down to the number of injuries we've had and the fact that he's had to play 4 or 5 games on the left, which he's never done before in his career at first class level. So it's harsh. It's the nature of playing at a club like Spurs, is that you just don't get the time. And if you're not good immediately, then fans will begin to write you off. Certainly in the advent of social media, a couple of bad games and you'll have 100 Spurs fans or whatever relative football club you're talking to, slagging them off. The reality is that players like Heung-min Son started their football at Spurs, not pulling up trees, and look what he went on to do. We paid £47 million for him. He's got a 5-year contract, regardless of what Peter, Paul, and Barry think on Twitter. He's a part of our first team squad, and he has to be, because you can't just drop £47 million on him. And Postecoglou, I'm sure, sees the player in him and continues to play him. So we're all out an opinion, but the opinion that we have on Brennan Johnson is going to impact whether or not he's a success at Tottenham. And as long as Postecoglou sees the value in him and has time to work with him, hopefully he will eventually become an excellent player for Spurs. In terms of his attributes, though, his ability his pace is important. When he's had opportunities to deliver into the box, there have been moments of complete class, and he's got 4 assists to his name in 12 appearances. So it's not terrible, but his performances overall, like you saw against Manchester City, he was just a level below. He needs to work on it.
Yeah, let's touch on Antonio Nusa then, because just before we started recording, actually, I saw a Brentford page on Twitter, someone spotted him at the airport, and he spoke to him and said that he is signing for Brentford, but he's going to go back on loan to Bruges for the rest of the season. I saw that you guys released a podcast on him, like a player profile kind of thing. I assume I haven't had time to listen to it yet, but just give me your thoughts on that. It's a weird old world where it looks like Forest. Well, you bought Brennan Johnson from Forest for about 50 million, and we may be getting someone with a higher ceiling for a lot less.
Yeah. Okay. So the podcast you're talking about is called The Lab, and that is like a subsidiary podcast to the Fighting Cock. And we spoke to a gentleman called Kish. He runs that at Lily White Lab Twitter account, and we were talking about Nusa and the prospect of buying him, and he was very excited at the prospect. He's a player with a very high ceiling. You would argue on paper and on hype that it was probably higher than Brennan Johnson's, or he's a good 3 or 4 years ahead of him in terms of ages. So, and I think we were excited about the prospect of having this kid. People are comparing him to sort of a young Neymar. He's a part of a Danish contingent of young players, not Danish, my bad, Norwegian contingent of young players that are proven to be excellent. They're doing amazing stuff in youth development in Norway, and so he seems to be another on a train. We of excellent talent. We were talking about it on the Fighting Cock main pod today. It's just gone out, and there was 2 schools of thought. I said I actually admire it of him that he's saying if whatever club I want to join, I need to play. I want to play. Brentford have offered him first team football, and that's where he's going. Because from a player, with all due respect to Brentford, if you're a young player coming up through in Norway and there's an opportunity to play for a Big Six club in inverted commas, then mostly you would expect them to join the Big Six club because there's money there but he's actually gone, no, it's opportunity I want, not money. And he has so much faith in his ability to perform that he's joined the club with a lesser reputation historically, but more opportunity. So for me, I think that's a greater testament to his character and what he aims to do in the game. There was another bloke on the pod, Ricky. He said actually he thinks less of him because he wanted things for his Spurs. He thinks less of him because look at the examples of Udogie, of Sarr, where they've been bought sent back on loan and forced their way into the first team. The reality, though, when you look at it, is that he's looking at Spurs. There's Hummins on there, and we're apparently, and this is how things might tie in with Brentford again, looking for a number 9 in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're Nusa, you're going, well, I'm never going to displace Son, or it's going to take a lot. Like, Son is our club captain. He's going to have to play under him. So he's probably looking at it going, there's no real road to the first team without me having to really pull up trees. And how can I do that without opportunities? So I think for him, he's probably done the right thing. I think he's probably made the right decision. As frustrating it is for us because we want to see him, he's saying, I'm better than cameo appearances in League Cups and Europa League, or God willing, Champions League next season. And fair play to him. Fair play to him. And yeah, I'm sure he'll have a great career with that attitude, but it appears not with Tottenham.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't write it off just yet. I mean, Brentford's mantra is buy, even though this one isn't quite cheap per se, but buy low and sell high. And with a ceiling, I mean, I say with a ceiling, I can't say that I've watched loads of him, but I've watched, I've gone through the compilations as you do when you sign a new player, and he looks the mustard. Yeah. So it's going to be.
He looks great. He looks great, but it's hard for a player who has been used sparingly by Club Brugge in the Belgian football league. For him to demand first team football at Tottenham it was never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that ambition is crucial. So he's gonna if you can get. I mean, what are you expecting of him? If he's been promised first team football, he's have to be starting 70% of the games. My worry at Spurs would be if he starts and goes, all right, he's not Premier League level yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it really depends on what happens with the Ivan Toney situation. We have another player called Kevin Schade who was injured in the early, sort of late stages of last year. He's got a very similar profile to Ollie Watkins. And what we actually did with Ollie Watkins when we signed him from Exeter was we had him on the left wing and we converted him to a striker. So there's been chatter online about how maybe once Toney's gone, we'll try and convert Schade into a traditional number 9 as we did with Ollie Watkins and then have Nusa on the left.
Is there only one obvious that plays in that left hand? Is it Schade who would have played there?
Yeah, Schade normally plays down the left. Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, we've had so many injuries, and Bumo's out injured.
Yeah,
Tony's only just
many as ours, I think.
Yeah, we've had a pretty shit time with injuries. So but with these players coming back and Toney looking like he's going to go, probably not in this window, but you never say never. In the next window, it will be interesting to see how we shape up. But if we do manage to sell Toney, I'd imagine we would still try and get some form of traditional number 9, dependent on how confident they are in.
What's your opinion on him? From an outside perspective, we just think the whole thing's a bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think I speak for all Brentford fans when I say that we like Toney the player, but not Toney the man.
Yeah.
It's difficult to hate someone who's so good at football and scores a lot of goals for your team. But I mean, in the interviews, the last thing you want him to say is that he's looking for a move to a top club, or that he wants. I mean, every footballer has aspirations, and that's fair enough. But I wanted him to come out and say, "I'm focused on playing my football for Brentford." But he kind of left out the for Brentford part and just said, "I'm focused on playing my football." Some of the stuff that he said about the club in the past, you can't really excuse.
He's not someone that I'd want Spurs to sign for those reasons that you've just said.
I think you could do with him. He'd definitely make you a better team.
I don't know, without a shadow of a doubt. I think he's incredible forward. I think he would bag goals for Tottenham, or wherever he goes, he's going to score, and he's done brilliantly for Brentford. But I just cannot abide someone who would literally, for the sake of someone's Snapchat, talk about the club in the way that he did for Brentford. It's shocking. Yeah. But and he's the way it was handled with him coming back. Let's say Brentford, like, do what you got to do, but just like you said, like his interview and sorry, excuse me,
swear away, mate.
The Daily Mail or whatever it was, the interview with him topless, and you're like, mate, do you know you did break the rules here? It's your fault you had an 8-month ban. You're betting on games that there's important reason why betting it shouldn't be allowed in professional football, because it could undermine the fabric of the competition. So no one feels sorry for you. So why are you behaving in the way that you've been locked up?
It is a bit weird.
Not for me.
I was listening to Filthy Fellas, and they were kind of saying, "No one's ever doubted you. Everyone's always thought you were a good player."
Yeah,
like
no one's doubting you. It's like you make these mad decisions.
Yeah, let's. I do want to talk about James Maddison. Obviously, it's good news for Tottenham that he's back. Not so good, not such great news for Brentford, considering he always has a blinder against us. He either scores or assists in every game that he's played against us, be that at Tottenham or at Norwich, where he was, or at Leicester, where he was in previous years. How big of a boost is it to have him back in the side, and do you expect him to start on Wednesday?
I do expect him to start on Wednesday. He looks a little bit couldn't quite catch up with the game when he came on, but that's understandable. He's been out for such a long time. I expect him to start against Brentford, and it's a massive boost to have him back. You saw how good he was in the Premier League in those first 10 games before he got injured. He was sensational, and there was this stat going around in terms of goals and assist contributions from midfielders. He was still like 6th in the Premier League, and he hasn't played for 3 months. So everyone knows how good James Maddison was, and everyone was no doubt surprised when we managed to get him for 40 million. To me, it was like a steal, but it just shows the level of injury that the number of injuries that we've had, but also how unlucky with the type of injuries some of these players have had, because Maddison there is a somewhat sort of sick note label that's applied to him that he's injury prone, but this injury is the longest he's been out ever in his club career, and he's played 10 games for Tottenham. So I feel at some degree we can feel a little bit sorry for ourselves in that instance. He's class. He's undoubtedly brilliant, and his ability to unpick stubborn defenses is something that we've missed massively. And I can't wait to see him playing again, and especially when Son comes back, if he ever gets back from the Asian Games. Asian Games, I can't remember what it's
Asian
called.
Cup.
Asian Cup. Sorry, Asian Games sounds like some sort of, I don't know, like a track meet or something. So when all of that's over and we can just look at other players and what we've got for the rest of the season, I'm just looking forward to that, because Son and Maddison and Romero as well were a part of our, essentially we have a group of captains. They're like leaders, whereas Maddison and Romero are vice captains, and Son is obviously club captain. But we've missed them not being together. And the players have done brilliantly, and Postecoglou's done brilliantly in trying to navigate these issues. But yeah, it'll be great to see them back again in his class. Yeah,
I'm surprised how long it took a top 6 club, in inverted commas, how long it took them to pick up James Maddison, because I think he's been class for years now. Just without wanting to make this an England podcast, but we do talk about England sometimes on this pod. It does in a fully fit England 11. Does James Maddison start for you now? You've seen him at Tottenham.
No, he doesn't, and that's down to Bellingham existing. Yeah. But he's good enough. He should be he should get way more minutes for England than he has done, and many more caps. But even as a Spurs fan who absolutely adores James Maddison, Bellingham's our
Bellingham's
great
guy,
now, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the guy.
He's the guy. Yeah.
I want to talk about Timo Werner, yet to get off the mark for Spurs. Being someone that's watched your stuff for quite a while, I know that you were a bit vocal about him during his stint at Chelsea, probably just by virtue of the fact that it was Chelsea.
I don't think I said anything negative about him, actually. You prove it. I don't know. I don't think I did.
I'd imagine that sentiment is gone now as your player, which is completely understandable, by the way. You want players coming into your club to do well for your team, even if they haven't quite made the impact of their previous club. How has he performed so far for Tottenham?
He played against Manchester United, and he looked like he'd been there 2 days, he was fine. There's a couple of opportunities against Man City, much better. I still feel like he's suffering somewhat from perhaps not having the chemistry with the other players, because there were about 6 or 7 opportunities, maybe that's too much, 4 or 5 opportunities where he had created space for his movement and just wasn't found. And if Maddison was on the pitch, perhaps, or if his relationship with Doggy was better, that he would have been found and created opportunities. But like any tactic that a manager employs always has failings, right? So Guardiola's tactic against Tottenham was perfect. It's almost. There was almost nothing wrong with it. It was really difficult. They were well drilled. They were excellent. They were concise in their passing. They were just fantastic, right? Well, the best team to play at Spurs this year, without a shadow of a doubt. But the one failing they did have, and maybe they're aware of this, was that they couldn't quite deal with or were committed in a way that meant that Werner had space. And there were, like I say, several opportunities where he should have been found and wasn't. And should he been given this opportunity and the service that his movement deserved, then we might have been talking about a different game. But yeah, he's got a lot to do to fill Humming-Son's shoes, but that's what he's been brought in to do. And he's got an assist to his name, so yeah, all good. There's nothing. I mean, he'll play against Brentford for sure.
Yeah, I'm having nightmares about that. He's probably going to be up against Mads Roerslev, I'd imagine, which might be a little bit of a mismatch. But last couple of questions, Mick, because I know we've been going on for a while now.
Right.
Pedro Porro, I know Destiny Udogi's kind of been stealing the headlines, being in people's teams of the season, and rightfully so. I think he's got a very high ceiling as well. Yeah. But Pedro Porro, for me, when I was watching Tottenham last year and you guys signed him, I know that his first couple of performances were a little bit shaky, but this season, every time I've watched Tottenham, he's been bang on it. And fucking hell, when he hits a ball, it really stays hit.
Yeah, look, he scored 3 blinding goals last season when like I said, when everything was going a bit tits up. There's a couple of things about him. If you ask some Spurs fans, myself included, I would say he's probably been our best player this year. And he's been benefited from major absences from Van der Ven and Maddison, but he's been sensational, really has. And he's a lot of it's about his attitude and how he's. I just keep saying this. We're pulling in the same direction. Everyone seems to have bought into it. He's enjoying his football. He was doubted when he started, certainly in the press. High-profile people like Tim Sherwood. And I wouldn't say learned, but high-profile people like Tim Sherwood, criticising his ability as a defender, and he's potentially a liability. And we, as Spurs fans, a lot of us did say that he's clearly a good player, but is he going to fit in this back four? Because he was bought as a wing-back under the Conte system, where the defensive part of your duties were less. There was less risk with them, so you could understand why Porro and Udogi were brought in, because you had a back three that would potentially clean up any issues that would be left by them going forward and providing a width for the team. And obviously, we knew that Postecoglou liked to do interesting things with his fullbacks. I didn't realise that it'd be as interesting as we'd seen, but they've gone from being question marks over there, whether or not how much they were going to play this season, to, oh my God, we can't do without them. And Udogi has rightly got a lot of plaudits, but Pedro Porro, I'd say, is probably having a better season out of the two. But they've both been playing some blinding football.
Yeah. I'd expect both of them to have a big role on Wednesday. Final couple of questions, mate. Just something I ask all of my guests. What have you made of Brentford so far this season and Premier League in general?
I think in the Premier League in general, it's been fantastic. And Frank's clearly an excellent manager. And not a dissimilar trajectory to Premier League management than Postecoglou, in that it wasn't conventional. It was really based on his abilities as a manager that's given him the opportunity. And he's done brilliantly with Brentford, working in a system where players are going to be sold and your key players are going to be sold, and it never really looks like it seems to affect Brentford and his team and his playing style. And he's gone from, as much as I understand it, you'll know better than me, but it seems that he is always understanding of the situation and will play the brand of football that's required in order to amass the most amount of points. And when you're playing a system where statistics and you're operating a club where statistics and possibility and chance are massive, that to have a manager like him that's able to adapt accordingly is massive as well, and what's required. And this season you find yourself having a tricky season, but massive part of that is not having the players at your disposal in order to perform on a par, which at the start of the season you say Brentford would be finishing top 10 or thereabouts. So, I mean, as long as you can continue and escape relegation this season with your players coming back, and if you keep hold of Tony, you will do that without a shadow of a doubt. But there's always a question mark if you don't get those players. There's the future is bright for Brentford, and it's a mental story. It's a mental thing. For me, has been watching football since the 80s. The fact that Brentford are consistently not only just playing in the Premier League, but by rights should be there consistently. Coming from a ground as small as Griffin Park, of which I went there when I was 14. I went there in a pre-season friendly, and I was sick from alcohol for the first time in my life after going there. To go from that ground, which isn't suitable for the Premier League, to one that you've got now, and you're moving forward with a you can't. I mean, as a football fan, you can't. But in terms of a fan of the sport, you can't but applaud everything that's been happening there. But I've got a couple of mates at Brentford, and their attitude has changed. They've gone from being like humble to every time they get a result or anything, turn into arseholes, right? And there's a geezer that you might listen to the podcast. His name's Adam, and he's turned into an arsehole since Brentford have become good. But I've got mates actually, like another mate who's a Chelsea fan, and he's given up Chelsea because he just hates it, what the club's become. Because he lives in Ealing, I think he just goes down Brentford now, and he's like, I prefer this.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of Chelsea exiles that have season tickets at Brentford, which I don't really mind. Season tickets are cheaper, and it's going to be impossible to get a season ticket at Chelsea nowadays.
It remains a community football club, I think, and that is the key. Belonging to something is more important than trophies. That it's hard to believe that, because there are lots of people, certainly on social media, that they've chosen to support clubs that they have no real connection to, they have no relation to the family, and they've no sort of other reason that they've taken an interest in the glory of that previous glory of that football club. And that's fine. Anyone can choose whatever football club they want. I'm not. You do whatever you want to do, but you unfortunately don't. You miss out on the community of supporting a football club because of those reasons. So Brentford definitely offer that, and that's something that's worth something.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like there's a core of maybe 6,000, 7,000 fans, give or take, that were going back in the League 2 days, week in, week out, doing the away days and stuff. And we're all so delighted to be in the Premier. It's still kind of fever dream territory, but I hope
it's Benham, isn't it? Benham.
Yeah, Benham's the owner.
As long as he's there, you can't see a world where this falls apart, because it's even if there is you have a poor season or a very poor season and you get relegated, it's only a matter of time before the system kicks back into gear. And actually operating at this level at the Premier League, getting it right at this level, is much more harder than being consistently good in the Championship and finding those players that have been cast aside by others and just looking at their metrics and realizing that there's a player in there, but for whatever reason it hasn't worked previously, to where you're at now, where you have the speculation becomes more significant. Like Nusa is £30 million or 30 million euros is a significant speculation, but one that you hope pays off. The risk is greater, but whatever it is, that system works, and no one's really operating like Brentford do, or certainly they weren't previously. There's been a lot of envious eyes from clubs like Tottenham looking at Brentford and going, well, why can't we do what they're doing?
Yeah, 100%. Final one from me, Flav. Are you confident heading into Wednesday? What kind of game should we expect?
Well, I am confident, and I'm always confident with Spurs now. I feel like every game we go into, I was confident going into Man City. I was convinced we were going to win. So, look, we've lost 2 games in the league this season at home. We lost to Brentford. No, that's a lie. Actually, we lost to Chelsea as well. But in my mind, that didn't count. So really, we've lost 2, and Villa and West Ham were the games, and we should have buried both of those teams. The fact we lost those is an absolute scandal. So I would say that my anticipation is that it'd be difficult for Brentford. There will be opportunities for sure, because the way we play. How will Brentford set up, do you think?
We had this conversation, a brief conversation on the last podcast we did. Like you mentioned, Thomas Frank was quite adept at kind of sussing out the way that we need to play to get a win. I would have said we've got nothing to lose when we go away to a team like Spurs. And like you just said, I think we will get chances in the game. So I would prefer to go in a back 4 and just think, fuck it, we either get battered 4-0 or give it a right go, as opposed to setting up in a 5, which I think he will do, play a low block and try and hit Tottenham on the counter.
That's probably the best way to play, I would say. That if you want to get something out of the game without risk of being blown away, like you said, then a low block in a 5 at the back has proved effective in certain circumstances against Postecoglou's Tottenham. But if James Maddison starts, it's a different conversation because we have the tool to get around it, whereas previously we haven't. I don't think Maddison plays. I don't think he plays more than 60 minutes anyway. So my worry would be that you really compact, really sensible, pragmatic, but with purpose on the break, utilising Ivan Toney. It could be a problem. I hope not. It could be a problem.
I mean, look, the reverse fixture the first day of the season was a really good game and a game that I thought could have gone either way. So, and I know that was Postecoglou's first game in charge and a lot's changed since then. But I'm hoping for fundamentally a good game of football, and I think it would be just that. Flav, we've gone on for a while now, but that was really fun. The Elam Road podcast will be back in the week to go over the Spurs result and then to preview City at home next Monday. Before we go, I do want to hear from the listeners in the comments. Last week's response was really nice to see. Lots of interaction engagement. So please do drop your thoughts ahead of the Spurs game down below. And whilst you're at it, remember to like and subscribe to the YouTube channels and the Spotify one too. And also give us a follow on our socials. That's at Elam Road on Twitter and at Elam Road Pod on Instagram. Flav, mate, that was fantastic. And good luck for Wednesday.
Nice one, mate. Thank you.